Hey, what's up guys? It's Rick with the Digital Divide, and if you watched my channel, then you probably know that I absolutely love the Sega Saturn. It's one of my favorite consoles ever made, and one of its best franchises was the Panzer Dragoon series of games. And so today I want to do a retrospective on this series. Now, the first game that came out was the original Panzer Dragoon, which released in North America on May 11th, 1995. This was one of 6 launch games that were released for the Sega Saturn, and the story loosely is that thousands of years in the future, mankind has been almost wiped out of existence, and they're in fear of cyber and genetic warfare, but they have some hope in these dragons, and for some reason, some people have the ability to communicate with dragons, and they can ride them, and those people are called dragon riders, and essentially they are working together to defeat the evil forces of the Dark Dragon, which is the main antagonist in this first game. So the first game opens up in this beautiful ocean. There's some cool reflections here. Again, this was one of the first games that came out on the Saturn, and it doesn't hold up particularly well today, at least not this first initial launch. The frame rate is struggling a little bit, and they were still getting used to the Saturn hardware. It was a relatively complicated system to develop games for, but given the short time frame that Sega had to put this together for launch, I think they did a really great job. The game, despite any technical limitations, is incredibly fun to play. And it was really novel at the time because you could look in any direction. So although you were still kind of on rails, you had the freedom to look wherever you wanted to. Everything was rendered with polygons and complete 3D, and there were different paths that you could take. And the first Panzer Dragoon did well enough to get an official PC port, which released in 1996. Now, the PC port of the game is essentially identical for the most part to the Sega Saturn version of the game, minus a much higher resolution. The game looked really sharp, but when it initially came out, it was full of bugs, and it didn't run well on most hardware. As you can see, it does look a lot cleaner in this footage here, but the game came out in the early days of PC gaming, so it only supported software-based rendering. There was no hardware-based acceleration. You can see the side-by-side here of the PC version on the left versus the Sega Saturn version on the right, and again, they are mostly identical aside from the resolution of the game itself, if your PC could support it. Next came Panzer Dragoon 2, which was released March 22nd of 1996 in North America. This game took advantage of the added development time and experience for the internal Sega development team, and it shows. The rendering engine used for the second release was improved and optimized, and this game looked dramatically better than the first game, almost to the point where they don't even look like the same game. The opening scene here it adds some variety in that you start off on the ground. So not only do you have the traditional air combat, but now you have these on-ground segments. So this kind of gameplay is what inspired the modern Star Fox, I think, particularly Star Fox 64. Just the scope and scale of this second release is unparalleled. You dive off this cliff here in one of the opening sequence, and you get your initial flight, and the sky looks just beautiful. This game is my favorite in the series. This game featured full, in-game cinematics with voice acting. It was just a huge step up production-wise from the first entry in the series, and this one really put Panzer Dragoon on the map. And as I stated, it remains my favorite entry in the series, despite some really strong contenders. And you can tell visually they just added so many flourishes, and they're really pushing the Saturn hardware to its limits. And this game, at the time that it released, was incredibly impressive looking and just so much fun. I can't recommend this one enough, and it's not terribly expensive, so if you have a Sega Saturn, highly recommend finding this game. This game introduced dragon evolutions. As you can see here later on in the game, my dragon is much bigger and has now turned red in color. So depending on which paths you take in the game and how you play, your dragon will evolve and change colors and different shapes. Kind of lets you personalize your experience each time you play it. Now, the last entry, at least for the Sega Saturn, was Panzer Dragoon Saga, and this came out in January of 1998. This game completely changed the formula. Whereas the previous two entries were straight up just shooters, this is a full-on RPG, and it's massive. As you can see, it spans 4 discs. Visually, this game is probably up there. It's one of the more visually impressive games on the Sega Saturn. The combat, though, has changed, so you have these gauges now, and each gauge will fill up and determine what actions you can take. So combat is mostly menu-based at this point. And again, this is just a full-on RPG. It completely changes the gameplay. This is a slower pace, so if you're not a fan of RPGs, you may have skipped this one, but you really shouldn't, because even though it is very different from the other two, it is still incredibly fun and incredibly impressive. As you can see here, this game featured full-on transparencies for the water underneath you. It wasn't completely linear. You can go in multiple directions, and you have free reign to travel as much as you want. And not to mention, this was the first game in the series where you could actually get off of your dragon. So you can control the human directly, walk around towns, explore villages, talk to the NPCs in the villages, go inside of the buildings. I mean, this game was as open world as it got for the 32-bit era. It was just super impressive when it came out, and highly recommended. So again, you've still got your flying segments, although combat is a little bit more deliberate. I think it's not as arcadey feeling, but you've got these completely voice-acted in-camera cutscenes where you can go inside of buildings, you can go through drawers, you can... It adds layers of story and immersion that this franchise never saw before and really never saw after this game. This was kind of a one-off where at the time PlayStation had a ton of RPGs, Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, all the Namco RPGs. That was kind of the RPG platform, and Sega didn't really have a lot of in-house developed alternatives to that. So they took one of their most popular franchises, which at the time was Panzer Dragoon for the Saturn, and then added a bunch of RPG elements, and it really did work. It was a great game. There was also a really impressive variety of areas to explore, and just like the previous entry of Panzer Dragoon 2, your dragon also evolves in this game. There's also an overworld where you can go into camp and heal your dragon and yourself and rest. You can go explore villages. It's just really, really great. I can't recommend this one enough. I highly recommend that if you have a Saturn, this is an absolute must-play. Now, having said all of that, this game is incredibly expensive, so it's understandable if you may not have had the opportunity to play it because of how much it cost. And there are a few reasons why this is so expensive. The first is that this game came out right at the end of the Saturn's lifespan. At the time, the Saturn was already on its way out. It was considered a failure, and this game came out right towards the end when nobody was buying the Saturn. So Sega shipped very few copies over to the USA because the sales expectations were low. The other reason why this game is expensive is because Sega actually lost the source code. Nobody knows where it went, and that means that you're probably never going to see a remaster of this game. It would have to be redone from the ground up.
Hi.
Hi.
Firstly, thank you so much for the game. It means a very lot. It means a lot to me. Is it true that the source code and assets for Saga have been lost?
Very good first question. Probably the top FAQ.
ですね、サガを作ってマスターアップしてリリースするまでの間に実は僕と吉田辞めてるんですね。だから本当はどこに行ったのか僕らも知らないんですよ。
So the true story is, so we mastered up Saga, and then between our master date and our release date, I left the company. So the true story is that I don't know what happened to the source code.
だけど、
However,
なんか、見つかったんじゃないっていう噂をどこかから聞いたような気がするので、見つかったのかもしれないです。
However, I have heard rumors, and maybe everyone here has heard rumors, that it may have been discovered somewhere at some point.
この部屋を出たら忘れてください。
But forget that I even said that once you leave this room.
So right now, the only way to play the game is on the Saturn, and you can see here that complete copies of this game go for around $1,000, depending on the game and whether or not it includes the original instruction manual and all of that stuff. But this game is very, very pricey. Shortly after this game released, the Sega Saturn would officially die, and Sega would move on to the Dreamcast. For some reason, though, they never made a Panzer Dragoon for the Sega Dreamcast. Instead, the next time we would see this franchise is actually on Microsoft's first console, the original Xbox. This was in the form of Panzer Dragoon Orta, which released in January of 2003. This game is ridiculously good. The Xbox kind of took over as Sega's pseudo-sequel to the Dreamcast when they went out of the hardware business. The Dreamcast was the last system that Sega ever made, but they continued to make software, and Panzer Dragoon Orta, which we're looking at now, is one of those games, and it was a massive step up in production value. As you can see from the pre-rendered intro video down to the graphics of the new engine, it was buttery smooth, full of particle effects and weather effects that were new to the series. This game just unbelievably beautiful looking, even to this day. I mean, just looking at this footage reminded me of how impressive this game was when it originally launched on the Xbox. And I was so happy when I played this game because I thought that Sega was never going to revive the series after the failure of Panzer Dragoon Saga. So this game kind of brought the series back to its roots. This is a straight-up action shooter game where you're flying on the Dragon and you have a kind of on-rails experience, but with a completely controllable camera and multiple paths that you can take. So this game was very much like the first and second entries in the series, albeit with much, much better visuals. I mean, this game just looks absolutely stunning, in my opinion, and featured just a scope and scale that I don't think anything from Sega has matched since. This is just super impressive looking. The music is amazing. The art design is incredible. And sadly, this would be the last game that we get in the franchise. Why they haven't come out with a new release in the last 10 years or so, I don't know why. And it makes me sad because I really hope that they bring this back. I mentioned that Panzer Dragoon Orta was the last game in the series, and that is chronologically correct, but there was a remake that came out in 2020. And in December of that year, they even came out with a physical copy of it that came in a reproduction Sega Saturn case, but it was actually a PlayStation 4 disc. I mean, it came out on multiple platforms, but that is absolutely incredible. I actually bought it on the Switch, and I love it. As a reminder, this is what the original version looked like on the Sega Saturn. And this is what the 2020 remake looks like. As you can see, it was rebuilt from the ground up. This is essentially a brand new game. The levels are the same, but everything from the models to the texture work, the lighting engine, everything is completely redone from the ground up, and it looks incredible. Again, I bought this for the Switch, but I believe it's also on Xbox, PC. I know it's on PlayStation as well. And this game is so much fun. And although it's very short, it is still very much worth picking up and playing it. I think that for newcomers especially, going back to the dated graphics of the original might be a bit of a challenge, but this one increases the visual fidelity while keeping the gameplay and the original art design and level design intact. As you can see, like, there's a whole new lighting engine when you go inside of these tunnels. Your weapons now light up the surrounding environments around you, and it just looks really, really impressive. I was super surprised when I played this because I didn't think it was going to be as in-depth of a remake as it was. I thought they were just going to spruce up the visuals a little bit, but no, this is a complete redo, and it is well worth picking up. Highly recommended. And if you're wondering if the Switch version holds up, it absolutely does. This is some gameplay off of my Switch Lite. The game runs buttery smooth on this platform and looks amazing. So again, if you can get this on sale, I would recommend it. Like, it is a very short game, so you'll probably beat it in 1 or 2 sittings. But those are the kind of games that Sega made. They made a lot of fast-paced arcade stuff. I do wanna quickly talk about Panzer Dragoon Mini. This was released exclusively in Japan in 1996 for the Sega Game Gear. This is a very, very basic version of this game. And that is to be expected due to the limitations of the hardware. I wouldn't recommend this one. It's a cool novelty, and it's interesting to play for a minute or two, but it's a really compromised experience. Obviously, the boss battles have been simplified. You're really just going in one direction. The camera will move, but only in boss battles, and you have no control over it. The combat is just too basic. I would not recommend picking this up, but overall, this franchise as a whole is just incredible. Every single entry in the series is worth playing, minus that spin-off Game Gear port that is just not great. And again, that's just a limitation of the hardware. There wasn't much that they could do with the Game Gear. But let me know if you have any nostalgia for this franchise, if you grew up playing these games. Leave something in a comment below. As always, thank you for watching.